Prepare yourselves, because what you're about to witness is not just a glimpse into a distant conflict, but a chilling forecast of a nation teetering on the edge. We're not talking about simple skirmishes or political debates. This is about a country, a world power, possibly spiraling into chaos. This isn't just a news report. It's a potential future reality, and it's far closer than many realize. Today we delve into the heart of Russia, a nation grappling with internal turmoil, economic pressures, and a military machine seemingly stretched to its breaking point. We'll be dissecting the recent events that are fueling whispers of a civil war, and questioning how much longer can the country withstand the weight of its actions. This isn't some far-off hypothetical. This is the present, unfolding before our very eyes. In this deep dive, we will cover this dramatic situation across 7 pivotal chapters, each revealing a new facet of Russia's descent, revealing the instability brewing beneath the surface and the chilling potential for widespread conflict. Don't go anywhere, because the conclusions we reach at the end will be nothing short of shocking. So buckle up, because this could be one of the most important videos you'll ever watch. Chapter 1: The Crippling Cost of Conflict. Russia's military intervention in Ukraine, initially framed as a limited operation, has morphed into a relentless drain on the nation's resources and stability, almost pulling apart the very fabric of Russian society. The Kremlin, under Vladimir Putin's command, is continuously recruiting more soldiers, leaving crucial sectors of the economy with an unprecedented labor shortage. The partial mobilization of 300,000 individuals in 2022 sent the already struggling economy into a deeper downturn. Now, amid rumors of a second mobilization of equal magnitude, the situation is reaching critical levels. Unnamed sources within the Russian administration and defense ministry suggest this new wave will again draw from reservists and current soldiers whose contracts are nearing expiry, essentially forcing them to renew for another round. This relentless conscription effort isn't a sign of strength, but rather a desperate attempt to fill the ranks as the flow of volunteers willing to fight wanes alarmingly. Military recruitment centers are now facing a significant decline in the number of new recruits, falling from several hundreds per day at their peak to barely a few dozen. This forces the Kremlin to resort to forceful conscription. These coercive methods, implemented since 2022, have upset the economic and labor balance in Russia. The core of the problem now faced by Russia is that a population of roughly 145 million is experiencing a severe deficit of working professionals due to the vast number conscripted into the army. Without enough skilled workers in production, Russia's long-term ability to sustain itself is coming into question. This raises key questions about Russia's economic resilience and the duration of its war effort. If these deep-rooted problems in manpower and production are left unattended, will Russia's defense and civil production collapse, essentially forcing the Kremlin leadership to negotiate with Ukraine? Chapter 2: The Faltering Military Machine. The strain on the Russian military isn't just about manpower. It's also about the quality of their equipment. There are widespread reports suggesting that the country is reverting to outdated Soviet-era technology due to the war's heavy toll. A staggering 80% of military equipment currently in use is refurbished from storage facilities, not newly manufactured. While Russian factories claim to produce 1,500 main battle tanks, 3,000 armored vehicles and personnel carriers, and over 609 M723 missiles per month, the majority of these deliveries, approximately 1,180 tanks and 2,470 fighting vehicles, are sourced from old warehouses. This dependence on outdated supplies means that Russia can barely maintain its current attrition rate for another 2 to 3 years. If the current casualty rates persist, Russia's ground forces could experience severe equipment depletion by 2026. The estimated annual production rate for main battle tanks is a mere 320, and for armored vehicles is only 530, which is insufficient to keep the Russian military running at wartime capacity. Furthermore, Russia's industry is largely incapable of producing advanced weapon systems like the Su-57 fighter jet or the T-14 Armata main battle tank, nor can it replenish the losses suffered by the Black Sea naval fleet. This inability has severely hampered Russia's defense exports, with its share in the global arms trade dropping from 21% to almost 11%. Russia is facing difficulties in fulfilling contracts for advanced weapon systems, and exports are plummeting as existing stock is diverted to cover the mounting losses. This struggle to maintain both domestic demand and export commitments underscores the deep strain on Russia's defense manufacturing capacity and its ability to project global military strength. The fact that even in the early days of the invasion of Ukraine, Russian defense enterprises had to offer inflated salaries to lure workers highlights the severity of the worker shortage. While this approach has brought in 520,000 new workers in the last year and a half, shortages persist. The Ministry of Industry and Trade reported a need for around 75,000 specialists by the end of 2023, but that figure has now more than doubled, with current estimates reaching 160,000. The overall shortage of the working class is about 400,000. In other words, the Russian industry needs over 500,000 workers. This manpower crisis extends to the experts with a lack of 160,000 specialists, according to Duma deputy and director of Pромsvazbank Academy, Alexei N.V. This situation is made worse by the fact that Pромsvazbank, Russia's main financial institution supporting defense procurement, has warned the Putin that Russia's workforce is slowly heading to collapse. By 2025, Russia will need over 250,000 specialists in its defense sector. This figure highlights the dire state of the labor market and the looming problems it poses for Russia's war efforts. Chapter 3. The cracks in the economic foundation. The Russian economy, once bolstered by its defense industry, is now showing alarming signs of instability. Despite Putin's claims of increasing weapons production, the reality is that the lack of skilled workers, coupled with the shift towards older equipment, is hindering true growth. The Russian leader insists that military production has significantly increased, but he also stressed the need to expand repairs on existing equipment and involve small to medium private enterprises. The calls for this expansion demonstrate how insufficient current resources are. Officials like Duma First Deputy Speaker, Denis Kravchenko, acknowledged that the defense sector labor shortage must be urgently addressed. Andrei Perov, from the Ministry of Industry and Trade, points out the competition between the defense and civilian sectors for personnel, further straining the country's workforce. The situation is that Putin prioritizes military and defense progress over all else, which has led to severe erosion of the civilian sector. The nation's once proud arms industry and export capabilities have suffered greatly, contrary to earlier boasts of its continued strength. State-sponsored propaganda had sought to reassure domestic and international audiences of Russia's ability to sustain the war and maintain arms sales. However, these narratives contrasted sharply with the pessimistic assessments both internationally and within Russia. Although Russian leadership reported on successful import substitution programs and improved military systems, reports from organizations like the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute suggest a sharp decline in sales that is being dismissed by Russian officials as temporary setbacks. However, the truth is that Russia struggles to meet domestic demand for weapons. Moreover, the credibility of Russia has been questioned for failing to produce advanced weapons, and now reportedly is attempting to buy weaponry from its former clients, as well as purchase second-hand Western machines from China. The import of military resources from countries like North Korea and China have not been able to fill the massive shortfall, nor has it been good for Putin's international reputation, and thus public perception. Pessimistic reports regarding the arms industry began to surface in even Russia's strictly controlled media. Experts admit the difficulties in keeping good relationships with customers, and that Russia is failing to deliver weapons to longtime customers, such as India and Armenia. Some countries have shifted their purchasing away from Russia because of financial and reputational concerns, and nations such as Vietnam and Algeria have begun diversifying their arms suppliers. Russia's attempts to salvage these relationships have been met with little success, as even former Soviet republics like Kazakhstan are seeking new arms suppliers. This decline in international arms sales is projected to further weaken the Russian economy by up to 40% in research and development abilities. Analysts within Russia predict that this reduction of revenue from sales will severely cripple the nation's industrial might. Chapter 4. The People's Breaking Point. The economic pressure on Russia is reaching a critical point. The exact scale of Russian defense spending is difficult to determine, but experts estimate that it was approximately $108 billion in 2023 and has risen 60% in 2024 to around 7.5% of GDP and 33% of the entire federal budget. Putin claims that the 520,000 new jobs within the defense sector have significantly boosted the country's economy, but these gains are masking deeper instability. Purchasing power parity reveals that Russia's real defense spending is far greater than the recorded $18 billion, as the country pays in rubles and benefits from low salary and commodity input costs. However, the long-term instability of this system is evident, especially with a 21% interest rate and a number of financial distortions. The overinvestment in the defense industry is pulling resources from other key sectors, causing wider issues due to higher salaries and inflation. The ruble's extreme depreciation and the significant food inflation crisis are adding more strain, thus increasing the discontent among citizens. The country is relying more and more on energy resources as leverage to counteract the issues. However, even this is unreliable with sanctions and price caps imposed by Western nations. The U.S. Treasury Department asserts that the price cap has decreased Russian state revenue by 40%. Russia has adopted a Kalashnikov economy mentality with focus on mass production of cheaper, less sophisticated weaponry and refurbishing warehoused equipment instead of producing new tech. Russia is reportedly producing and importing around 2.5 to 5 million shells annually. This massive expenditure, however, is masking a large increase in public dissatisfaction. Sanctions have also had a significant impact on the supply of critical components required for modern defense equipment. These sanctions have significantly impeded the import of vital parts for the production of new machinery. Ultimately, the shortage of soldiers in the army has crippled the economy, drawing workers from both the civilian and defense sectors, and leaving the Russian military unable to recover. The state's reliance on older methods of production only highlights the problems Putin is facing with the war and sanctions. Even the deepening ties between Russia and North Korea highlight how desperate the Russian state is becoming, and thus how it is also losing international support and face. The Russian people are facing increasing hardships and uncertainty about the future, and a great number of them are against the war. Chapter 5: A Nation Divided. The cracks in Russia are not just economic, they are also deeply social and psychological. The very people who are meant to be the foundation of the state are increasingly expressing their opposition to the war, which has led to the creation of new internal divisions. The situation is getting so critical that protests have begun, particularly in regions like Belgorod, Bryansk, and in northern Russia, where residents are experiencing severe disruptions in power and heating. Residents are being urged to stockpile firewood and acquire generators to prepare for the harsh winter. Emergency evacuations drills are now commonplace, highlighting the rising concerns of the public. While the unemployment rate has not risen to record levels, the 2 million unemployed in the country are adding a huge amount of pressure on the economy. A large part of this pressure is due to sanctions, which a vast majority of Russians blame for the economic decline. In fact, it is reported that a large number of citizens do not want the war to continue and want everything to return to normal. While Putin tries to suppress these dissenters with severe criminal sanctions, the situation seems to be getting more out of his control. The ruble's devaluation, now worth less than a cent, is having a catastrophic impact on citizens' savings and purchasing power. This is contributing to a serious food inflation crisis that experts say is out of control. Since the summer of 2023, food prices have risen by an average of 11% and show no signs of stopping. Prices on meat, dairy, oil, and bread are causing extreme hardship, particularly on low-income families. As winter approaches, shortages and high fuel prices are further adding to the pressure. Despite government measures to stabilize fuel prices, gasoline in Russia is rising, now 6.8% year-on-year, with no end in sight. The construction industry, a critical aspect of any economy, is also experiencing high prices, thus further limiting growth and opportunities. This combination of rising food prices, high fuel costs, and increasing building expenses is creating an inflationary crisis that affects all aspects of life. The dire situation is further compounded by the Russian central bank's decision to raise the key interest rate to a staggering 21%, which is the highest since 2003. This move is having an adverse impact on business and threatening the economy. Some business leaders like Sergei Chemezov warned that this high interest rate would cause the bankruptcy of most businesses. This public challenge from within the establishment is a highly significant development. Since 2004, Putin and his cronies have enriched themselves, but now because of Western sanctions, the profits of companies such as Gazprom are dwindling. Russia's economic situation is a direct result of Putin's actions in Ukraine. The only way to resolve the issues is to end the war and withdraw from Ukraine, but Putin appears unwilling to acknowledge this solution. Instead, Putin enriches the ruling elite by directing state funds to the war machine to maintain control. This policy, however, has only further eroded the country's economy and has made many rich businessmen flee the country. Even if the war ends, the potential drop in real incomes for a large portion of the population could lead to increased social tensions and threaten the ruling regime. All of these issues point to Russia slowly turning into a tinderbox, primed to explode at any moment. Chapter 6: The Seeds of Disobedience. The discontent within Russia is not just confined to the economic sphere. It's also manifesting as acts of disobedience within the military and among the general public. The war in Ukraine is turning into a war within Russia itself, as people lose faith in Putin and his regime. The trust and loyalty of the Russian people to Vladimir Putin is diminishing with every passing day. The protracted war, the failures in military organization, the economic devastation, and psychological trauma are taking a toll. Faced with these conditions, some Russian soldiers are raising the flag of rebellion. A significant number of these soldiers are switching sides, joining pro-Ukrainian forces, or providing intelligence to Ukrainian agencies. This situation of Russian soldiers betraying the state has been seen as a sign that the Russian army is rotting from the inside. This has had an important impact on troop morale, where soldiers are abandoning their posts or working against Russian leadership. The Ukrainian special services have a network of agents who are carrying out espionage missions in the Russian army. One of the most active groups is Atesh, founded by Crimean Tatars, which includes over 2,000 resistance fighters who work behind enemy lines, infiltrating the Russian army. These groups are able to rely on inside information from the local population and Russian soldiers alike. Many of these soldiers provide vital intel about troop movements, weapons deliveries, and command locations, becoming the eyes and ears of Atesh. Some are taking part in high-risk operations, such as damaging equipment, sabotaging vehicles, and setting fires to expose Russian positions, further demonstrating the disintegration of the Russian military. Many Russians now see the war as pointless, calling it a full-scale war. Soldiers themselves often don't want to be there. Many are being driven by necessity and not because of genuine belief. This is very much in contrast to Ukrainian forces, who are fighting for their own families and homes. This points to an unstable structure with a military that is losing its cohesion, leading to dangerous consequences. It begs the question as to what do the ordinary Russian people really want? Surveys indicate that the majority are now against the war and are seeking peace with Ukraine. While there is always a question of the honesty of the responses given that the FSB is known to be monitoring these things, still, a recent study by the Chronicles Research Project shows that 49% of Russians now want peace, compared to the 39% from the previous year. This number is also in contrast to the 29% who support new mobilizations. In fact, of those surveyed, over 29% would refuse to fight at all, and only 14% would be a volunteer. More importantly, of those willing to fight, it is mostly men who are older, 50-60, while less than 7% of young men between 18 and 24 would be willing to fight. This shows a very telling story of the Russian public, who are mostly against the war and are unwilling to fight for Putin's regime. Another survey by Extreme Scan showed that when the question was put to people on whether or not their male friends would join the war, 40% said that their acquaintances would not join, compared to 23% who said they would join the army. This difference highlights the growing number of Russians who are against the war, despite the government's insistence on public support. Chapter 7: The Unseen Revolution. The most critical question remains: will these pressures finally boil over into a large-scale revolt, or even a civil war within Russia? The seeds of discord have been sown, and the consequences could be earth-shattering. The Russian government's approach to the war has been devastating for its people, particularly the frontline soldiers. Many are sent to the front with little training or equipment and face terrible conditions, causing their morale and patriotism to plummet. As the news spreads, many are fleeing the country, while others are taking to the streets, a sign of a growing unrest. Instead of solving these issues, the government is doubling down on repression, which only further alienates citizens. The public is splitting into two camps: those who support the war and Z patriots, and the ordinary citizens who do not agree with Putin and his regime. These two groups are reinforcing their beliefs when in contact with the other side. This shows a nation on the edge. The lack of clear leadership to unite the opposition is the main factor in keeping large-scale civil disobedience at bay. However, one cannot deny that this situation has the potential to explode in a moment's notice. Unlike a traditional war, civil conflicts do not have clear goals and parameters, which means that the situation is all the more unpredictable. Russia's internal strife has grown because of the war in Ukraine, which initially was presented as a special military operation, but has turned into a war of aggression against Ukraine and has led to a loss of confidence in the government. This war also made people begin to see Putin's true nature, which has resulted in the rapid loss of public trust. The 2023 Wagner Group rebellion shows how these internal divisions can turn into open conflict overnight, turning the perception of a stable regime into an illusion. Russian history shows that change can happen seemingly out of nowhere and rapidly transform the country. The possibility of a civil war is more likely than direct protests, because a movement against the war can gather more support. If the anti-war movement gains enough support, it will become a powerful force to change the nature of protests against Putin. As the war continues and sanctions become more effective, the Russian people will experience more hardships. As more people experience these issues, it is likely that even more will call for peace. While the government may suppress opposition, they cannot suppress the growing discontent indefinitely. This could eventually lead to widespread protests, threatening the entire Putin regime. The longer the conflict continues, the more likely that public unrest will lead to the end of his rule. The government is well aware of the dangers of not only the situation in Ukraine, but also with the internal dissent of its own people, and are trying to keep it under control. But the combination of economic issues and public opposition cannot be indefinitely avoided. Russia is a nation at a crossroads, with the potential for unprecedented change. And now, as we arrive at the conclusion, we have reached a point of no return, and the situation is only going to get worse. As we have seen, the Russian people and the Russian military are at breaking point, and thus, it is only a matter of time until there is a massive change from within. The question is not if there will be a shift, but when. The future of Russia hangs in the balance. With a growing internal movement among the military and the Russian public, it is only a matter of time before a powerful new force emerges. A force for change that was never before seen. A powerful military force of Russian soldiers fighting against Putin. They are not just working against him as saboteurs or spies. They have organized themselves into an army. This army plans to march on Moscow. Conclusion: the unfolding future. As we conclude our in-depth analysis, it becomes clear that Russia's future is anything but certain. The confluence of economic strain, social unrest, and military failures has created a powder keg of instability. The war in Ukraine, rather than uniting the nation, has exposed deep fractures within Russian society and its military. We are not just witnessing a geopolitical conflict. We are witnessing a nation struggling with its own identity and direction. The growing number of Russian soldiers aligning with Ukraine and the public's growing anger are both potent signs of a massive change. The emergence of this unseen army is a testament to the level of internal resistance and the growing cracks in the Putin regime. It's no longer just whispers in the dark. It's a tangible force, moving with purpose and a clear objective to bring about change. The question is, will the Kremlin be able to withstand the inevitable internal conflict that this will bring about? We will have to watch, observe, and wait to see this final chapter unfold before us. Remember to subscribe, like this video, and enable the notifications so you won't miss out on any future updates on this critical situation.